Have you ever noticed how quietly it happens? One day your phone stops ringing as often. The calendar that was once crowded with lunches, birthdays, and reunions starts to empty out. Not all at once, but like a slow, steady tide drawing back from the shore. You don't remember deciding to step away, but somehow, being around people no longer feels the way it used to. And here's the strange part. It's not because something went terribly wrong. You haven't become bitter. You haven't lost your warmth. You still care. You still love. But something inside you has shifted. And it's not weakness. It's something else. Something quieter. There's a question that few dare to ask out loud, but many carry in the stillness of their hearts. Why don't I enjoy being around people like I used to? If that question awakens something in you, if it stirs a memory, a longing, or even a bit of guilt, you are far from alone. There comes a time in life, often without warning, when the noise that once brought joy begins to feel heavy. When conversations that once flowed now feel like small talk dressed in old clothes. And perhaps for the first time in decades, you find a strange kind of peace in your own company. This story isn't about loneliness. It's not about sadness. It's about awakening. A quiet, sacred kind. The kind that happens when the world gets louder and you start listening inward instead. So come closer. Let me tell you a story, not just with facts, but with the kind of truth that lives in the folds of memory and time. Because maybe, just maybe, the space you've been keeping isn't emptiness. It's clarity. The first shift, the quiet bruises. We carry it often begins with a smile you can't quite return, a phone call you hesitate to answer, an invitation that sits unopened because the thought of going feels heavier than the guilt of staying home. You tell yourself you're just tired, that it's nothing, that you're still the same. But somewhere beneath those simple explanations lies something deeper, something older than fatigue, something shaped not in days, but in decades. We don't retreat from others because we've become cold. We retreat because we've learned. Scientists call it relational fatigue, a state where the emotional cost of connection begins to outweigh its rewards. It's not about lacking love. It's about protecting what's left of your energy after years of giving it away. You see, as the brain ages, our tolerance for emotional friction naturally declines. The amygdala, the part responsible for processing threat and stress, becomes more sensitive to conflict, even subtle forms like disapproval or inauthenticity. Meanwhile, our threshold for superficiality thins. We become neurologically attuned not to how people look or what they say, but how they make us feel once they're gone. Take Eleanor. She was the queen of Sunday dinners, the kind of woman whose laughter could lift a room, whose table was never too small for one more guest. But now at 81, her dining room sits quiet, the fine china tucked behind glass, untouched. It wasn't one betrayal that silenced her laughter. It was the soft erosion of trust over time. A friend who disappeared when her husband passed. A neighbor who used her grief as gossip. A confidant who shared what was meant to stay sacred. No one stormed out. No one slammed a door. But doors closed all the same. And in their place, a shell formed. Subtle but strong. Not of bitterness, but of discernment. Not to shut people out, but to keep her peace in. We are told that wisdom is measured in years, but in truth, it is often measured in silence, in what we no longer say, in who we no longer chase, in the front row seats we no longer hand out to just anyone. Even Maya Angelou, a woman whose words moved nations, once said, "When someone shows you who they are, believe them the first time." That truth echoes louder with age, doesn't it? Because when you've been hurt, not once, but quietly over time, you learn to stop proving your worth to people who never truly saw it in the first place. So if you found yourself pulling back, if your voice has softened, your circle has shrunk, your heart has grown quieter, know this: You're not disappearing. You're refining. You're not bitter. You're boundaried. And that is not a flaw. It's a form of freedom. When noise becomes numbness. But here's where the story takes a quieter, more dangerous turn. Because after the bruises have settled, after the doors have closed without a sound, something strange begins to happen. The world doesn't stop calling. The invitations still come. The phone still rings. The family still gathers. But you start to drift. Not with bitterness, not even with sadness, but with a kind of gentle detachment. And this is where many don't even realize it's happening, because it's not a dramatic rejection of others. It's not a conscious choice to isolate. It's far more subtle. It's the slow dulling of your own emotional frequency. You begin to nod along in conversations that no longer touch you. You smile at stories that no longer stir anything inside. You sit among people, but feel miles away. Not because you're broken, but because the noise around you no longer resonates with the rhythm of your soul. And here's the warning I must speak aloud, because too many suffer in silence, mistaking numbness for peace. Beware the moment when emptiness feels easier than expression, when silence becomes a mask, not a sanctuary, when the desire to avoid discomfort slowly becomes a habit of disappearing from yourself. Because while solitude can be sacred, emotional disconnection is not peace, it's erosion. Psychologists describe it as emotional withdrawal syndrome, often seen in older adults who've experienced chronic invalidation. Those moments, small and unspoken, when your truth was dismissed, your worries minimized, your presence overlooked. It's like trying to sing in a room where no one hears the melody. Eventually, even the most beautiful voice chooses quiet. Take Marie, a retired school teacher whose voice once filled classrooms with stories, songs, and life lessons. Now in family gatherings, she watches the younger ones with fondness, but rarely speaks. Not because she has nothing to say, but because she's been met too many times with polite nods, followed by eyes drifting back to glowing screens. The world didn't push her away. It simply stopped listening, and so she stopped offering. This is how the disconnect begins. Not with anger, but with apathy. Not with rejection, but with silence. And if you're not careful, that silence begins to echo inside you, until you forget what your own voice sounds like when it's truly heard, until you start to believe that your thoughts are too old, too slow, too heavy for the speed of the world. But hear this now. Before you fade further into the background, your voice is still valid. Your wisdom is not outdated, and your presence, though quieter, carries a weight no youth can replicate. Because the world may have changed its rhythm, but that doesn't mean you must surrender your own. The weight of wanting not to burden. There is a kind of silence that is not peaceful at all. It doesn't come from stillness. It comes from fear, the quiet, aching fear of becoming a burden. It's not something we often say aloud, because how do you confess that you're afraid your presence might weigh too heavily on the people you love? It begins so innocently. You hesitate before picking up the phone. You tell yourself, they're probably busy. You delay asking for help because you remember when you were the strong one, the dependable one, the one others leaned on. And now, the thought of needing too much feels almost shameful. It is a cruel irony, isn't it? That the more we've loved others, the less we want to trouble them. That the more we've held others up, the harder it becomes to ask someone to steady us. This fear doesn't come from pride. It comes from love, from dignity, from the quiet vow whispered deep within the aging heart, I never want to be a problem. But that vow, if left unchecked, begins to shrink the soul. You start saying I'm fine when you're not. You begin turning down invitations, not because you don't long to go, but because you don't want someone to rearrange their day for you. You stop speaking your needs, not because they don't matter, but because you convince yourself that everyone else's needs matter more. And so slowly, gently, your world gets smaller. Not because the walls are closing in, but because you're folding yourself smaller to fit into the spaces you believe you're allowed to occupy. Take Frank, an 84-year-old widower who once spent every Sunday with his daughter's family. As his legs grew weaker, he started declining their invitations, not because he stopped loving them, but because he couldn't bear the thought of someone lifting his walker into the car, slowing their plans, adjusting their pace. When asked why, he simply said, "They've got their own lives. I don't want to be in the way." But here's what Frank, and so many like him, forget. Love doesn't see you as weight. It sees you as home, as legacy, as something worth slowing down for. Yet still the fear remains. Because when your hands once held a household together, when your strength once carried others through storms, asking for support now can feel like surrendering who you used to be. But you are not a burden. Needing care is not weakness. It is part of the great cycle of being human. And just as you once stood tall for others, let them now learn the quiet grace of standing beside you. Because connection is not about being useful. It is about being present. And you and all your tenderness, wisdom, and age are still profoundly worthy of that space. The slow goodbye of old friendships. Some goodbyes don't come with tears. They don't arrive in the form of arguments or slammed doors. They don't sting sharply or leave visible scars. Instead, they come softly, like a light that slowly fades, like a voice on the other end of the line that simply stops calling. These are the endings that creep in unnoticed, until one day you glance back and realize a once vibrant friendship has gone silent. And the strangest part? There was no moment to blame, no single wound to point to, just the slow drifting of two people on different currents. You think of them sometimes, don't you? The ones who once laughed with you until midnight, the ones who knew your favorite tea, your quiet sorrows, the stories behind every photo on your wall. You remember how easy it once was, the way you finished each other's sentences, the rhythm of your shared memories. And yet now there's distance, not hostility, just absence. This is one of aging's most bittersweet truths. We do not only lose people to death, we lose them to time, to change, to life unfolding in different directions. Consider Ruth. She and her best friend from high school used to walk together every Wednesday, rain or shine. Those walks became monthly, then yearly, and then nothing. There was no falling out. Just a quiet shift, new routines, new priorities, new versions of themselves. Ruth said to me once, with a soft smile and tear-lined eyes, "We still care for each other, but maybe we've said all we needed to say." And maybe she's right, because some friendships were forged in shared seasons, raising children, building careers, living side by side. But when those seasons end, the thread that once tied you tightly may begin to loosen, not from neglect, but from growth. It's a kind of grief that doesn't always have a name. Because how do you mourn someone who's still alive? How do you say goodbye to a chapter that ended without a final page? But here's what I want you to know. Just because a connection fades doesn't mean it wasn't real. Just because it ended quietly doesn't mean it didn't matter. Sometimes letting go isn't failure, it's evolution, a gentle release of what no longer fits the person you've become. And as we grow older, we learn to stop chasing what has already drifted out to sea. We begin to honor the tide, to thank the memories, and to understand that closeness isn't measured in frequency, but in the imprint someone leaves on your soul. So if you felt the ache of old friendships fading, don't shame yourself for the distance, and don't force what no longer flows, because not every bond is meant to last forever. Some simply arrive to walk us through a season and then step quietly into memory, And then something unexpected happens. After the drifting, the silence, the distance, after the heartbreak of friendships lost and the ache of not wanting to be a burden, you begin to notice a different kind of stillness. Not the silence that echoes with absence, but one that hums with presence. Your presence. It starts in the smallest of moments. A morning when you sit with a cup of tea and realize you're in no rush to be anywhere but here. An afternoon where the sun pours through the window just right and you let yourself bask in it, without apology, without distraction. An evening when you turn off the television, not out of boredom, but because you'd rather hear the sound of your own thoughts. And in that stillness, something stirs. Not sadness, but self. The self you've always carried, but rarely paused to meet. You begin to remember who you are when no one is watching. Not the parent, not the partner, not the helper, the host, the fixer, just you. And you realize that your own company is not a consolation prize. It is a reward, one earned through years of noise, of service, of always being on. And now at last you are free to simply be. Science affirms what the soul already knows. As we age, our brains naturally crave introspection. The default mode network, a system in the brain tied to self-reflection, grows more active when we are alone. Not because we are withdrawing from life, but because we are integrating it, understanding it, finally living it on our own terms. Take Gerald, once the life of every party. His home was filled with laughter, his calendar bursting with gatherings. But now at 82, his favorite place is the porch at dawn, watching birds land in his garden, each one a quiet visitor to his sacred solitude. When asked if he gets lonely, he smiles and says, "I've got enough stories in my head to keep me company for days. And now I finally have the time to hear them." You see, the world may measure life in connections, but true fulfillment often blooms in reflection. And while society may whisper that aloneness is something to be feared, let me tell you this. There is nothing lonelier than being unseen in a crowd, and nothing more whole than being seen fully by yourself. So if you've found yourself savoring solitude, if the sound of your own breath brings comfort rather than ache, if you've begun to choose quiet over conversation, stillness over stimulation, know this: you are not fading, you are flowering, not empty, but finally full. Because sometimes it takes a lifetime of living for others to finally return to the sacred simplicity of being with yourself, not out of exile, but out of reverence. So here we are, at the quiet end of a story that, in truth, is still unfolding within you. Perhaps as you listened, something stirred, a memory, a truth you hadn't named, a softness that's been waiting in the corners of your heart. And maybe, just maybe, this story didn't tell you anything new. Maybe it simply reminded you of what you've always known, but never gave yourself permission to honor. That your need for quiet is not a flaw. That your distance is not disappearance. That your longing for solitude is not a sign of giving up, but a sign of coming home. You see, we live in a world that shouts, that measures value and visibility, that tells us the more people we please, the more we matter. But aging holds up a mirror to that noise and dares us to ask, what remains when all the applause fades? Who are you when no one is watching, asking, expecting? And if that question makes your chest tighten or your throat swell, good, let it, because that tension is not fear. It is awakening. The truth is, you were never meant to belong to everyone. You were never meant to be endless, available, accommodating. You are not a well to be drawn from without end. You are a soul, a story, a sacred geography. And now in this quieter season, you get to choose who stays close, what gets your energy, what finally is worth your time. This isn't the end of your connection to others. It's the rebirth of your connection to yourself. So take this as both a blessing and a challenge. To stop apologizing for needing space. To stop fearing the slowing of your pace. To honor your softness as strength and your silence as song. And when you walk away from the noise, from the conversations that drain you, from the gatherings that leave you lonelier than when you arrived, walk gently, yes, but walk proudly, because you are not fading, you are distilling, you are not lost, you are finally being found by yourself. And that is the most beautiful reunion of all. Until next time, be well, be whole, and when the world feels too loud, return to the quiet space inside you. It has been waiting for you all along.